2022 Partners in Action Annual Conference, and now I will introduce the presenter. Please welcome Russell Baker, Supervisory Realty Specialist, the Division of FIDA Trust at the Midwest Regional Office.
Hello, everybody. This is Russell. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Let's go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm just calling it a FIDA Trust update. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but there's actually been several FIDA Trust presentations during this PIA conference. So I didn't really want to overlap with things that you might have already seen. So I try to do something a little bit different here. And so let me just show you the 4 things I do want to talk about. So I do want to give a very brief FIDA Trust process overview, and that's just in case anybody out there is unfamiliar with the FIDA Trust process. And it's just going to take a few minutes. And then after I do that, I do want to talk about managing complexity in the FIDA Trust process. And then I was also on the National FIDA Trust Strike Team for 240 days. So I'd like to give you an update on the things we were working on at the national level. And then I do have some final thoughts on managing complexity in the FIDA Trust process. So let's go ahead and start out with the FIDA Trust process overview. This is actually a brochure that you can get online about the FIDA Trust, discretionary FIDA Trust process. And so I just want to talk a little bit about it. If you would take a look, there's actually 16 steps to the FIDA Trust process. And what I want to do right now, I just want to go over each of the steps, very basic, just so you kind of understand what needs to be done to get landed a trust. So let's just go on ahead and start with step 1. Step 1 is encoding to the FIDA Trust system of record. As soon as we get an application in, we need to encode that to our FIDA Trust system of record. Our FIDA Trust system of record is the trust accounting and asset management system. And we switched over to using that as our FIDA Trust system of record in 2019. So yes, as soon as you get a case, the first thing you want to do is get that encoded. One of the things I just want you to know about step 1 is that you're always going to be encoding as you process your case and things get done. You'll need to go into TAMS and update your case. So this is an ongoing step that you'll be doing right up until the very end. Step 2 is the review of the written request to initiate the process. So as soon as you get your application, you encode it into TAMS, you want to start reviewing it. And if you were actually pull the handbook, there is a list of required documentation that every application has to have. And all of the application, you pretty much need it in order to move forward with the next couple of steps. So that's one thing you want to do on step 2. There's another process that's also in step 2, and that is the legal review, description review process. And so that's also something that needs to be initiated as well. And I am going to talk a little bit about that more later. Step 3, so once you've reviewed your case, if you have everything that you need to move forward, then you don't need to do step 3. Step 3 is responding to an incomplete case. But if you do review your case and there are some missing documentation and you can't move forward with the next steps, then you do need to send out a notice of incomplete application to the applicant, to the tribe, and let them know exactly what they need to submit so that you can move forward with your case. One thing to note about step 3 is that although you may have a complete application at the beginning, as you go through the process, through the steps, you may find out that you may need additional documentation from the applicant. If you do need additional documentation, then you'll have to repeat this step and do the notice of incomplete process to get that information. And then step 4 is conducting the site inspection and completing the certificate of inspection and possession. And what that step 4 is what I would call it a title site inspection. So when you go out to do step 4, you're actually looking for any encroachments, you're looking for any unrecorded uses that aren't showing up on your, in the title. That's what you're doing with step 4. Step 5 is preparing the preliminary title opinion. The preliminary title opinion is issued by our field solicitor. And so you basically take all of the title documentation in your FIDA Trust application and requesting a preliminary title opinion. Step 6 is the notice of application. So with fee to trust, one of the things we have to do is when we get a fee to trust application, we have to provide a notice of that application to the state, county, local governments, and let them know that we are working on a fee to trust application. And we do give them an opportunity to comment on the fee to trust applications. And so that is step 6. Step 7 is environmental compliance review. And there are actually 2 components to that. The first one is National Environmental Policy Act compliance. We call it NEPA. And then the second part of that is the CERCLA, all appropriate inquiries. We call that a phase 1 environmental site assessment. So you'll have to get a phase 1 and a NEPA for step 7. Step 8 is the comments to the notice of application. So if you look at up there at step 6, you'll see that at step 6, we sent that notice out to the state and county and local governments. If they submit any comments, then we required in step 8 to send a copy of those comments to the applicant, or the tribe. And then we give the tribe an opportunity to comment on the comments. So that's basically step 8. Step 9 is satisfying the preliminary title opinion objections. So if you look up at step 5, we actually requested a preliminary title opinion from the solicitors, and they will issue a PTO. We call it a PTO. They'll issue the PTO, and once they do that, then we'll send a letter to the tribe or the applicant, and we'll let them know exactly all of the objections to title and everything they need to do. It's pretty detailed. We let them know exactly what they need to submit to us to resolve all the title objections. And then once you get all steps 1 through 9 complete, then we move forward with the decision and steps 10 and 11. And I'm going to talk about those together. So steps 10 and 11 is basically issuing the notice of decision. We send a decision letter to the tribe, to the applicant. And we also send it to all the interested parties, the state, the county, the local governments. And we do give everybody an opportunity to appeal the fee to trust decision. We also, step 11, we also publish the decision in the newspaper, and that's basically to give any interested parties not known of record a chance to appeal the decision. So we usually do that at the same time. And so there's 2 separate ways to appeal. If we do get an appeal, it's not listed on this brochure, but then at that point, we'll have to compile administrative record, and our appeals normally go to the Interior Board of Indian Appeals for an appeal decision. But if we do not get an appeal, then we can go on ahead and move forward with bringing that land into trust. And so there's actually a couple steps that involves that. So I want to talk about step 12 and 13 now. So step 12 is preparing the final certificate of inspection, which is the title inspection that we do. And so you definitely want to get out before bringing the land into trust and take a look at that property and make sure there aren't any new unrecorded uses or any new encroachments. And there's also a couple of other things that we do that isn't listed on the brochure. If your phase 1 environmental site assessment is expired, then you do have to go out and you're going to have to get that updated. And then also our policy does require that we get updated title evidence from the applicant right before bringing the land into trust. And that's just to make sure there are any new recorded encumbrances that we are not aware of. So once you do all of that, then you can go ahead and move forward with step 13. Step 13 is called acceptance of conveyance, but this is actually where we bring the land into trust. And basically how that works is the tribe will execute a fee to trust deed, and then we'll actually do an acceptance of conveyance, and the regional director or the superintendent will actually sign that deed and approve that deed, and it goes into trust right at that point. Once we do that, the very next step is to immediately record at the Land Titles and Records Office. And once we get it recorded, then the next thing we want to do is take that original deed and we send that to the applicant, the tribe, and we, with instructions to record that deed at the county. And so the tribe will go on ahead and record that deed. And then another thing they need to do is once they record the deed, they'll need to get updated title evidence that shows that deed has been recorded. And then they'll send the deed and the updated title evidence back to us. And then once we get that, we can request a final title opinion. And so I'm at step 15 right now. We'll request a final title opinion from the solicitors. And once we get the final title opinion, then we just submit a copy to the Land Titles and Records Office. And then the application is pretty much complete. The only thing left to do is step 16, which is the completed application packet. And what that basically is we sit and draft a closeout letter, and we attach all the completed title documentation and a copy of the title status report, and we send that to the applicant. So that's pretty much the fee to trust process. I just want you to know, in case there's anyone that's not familiar with it, because I will be talking about some this quite a bit as I go forward. The other thing I don't want everybody to know that I don't know if everyone is aware is that with fee to trust, we do not have to do all of the steps in sequence. We can actually, which is considered linear case processing, we can actually process the steps concurrently or repeat steps. So it's more of a non-linear style of case processing. So this is a quote right from page 7 of the Fee to Trust Handbook, and I'm just going to read it. It says that while steps within each of the handbook operating procedures are numbered sequentially, you may proceed concurrently on other steps when appropriate, or may repeat certain steps until the operating procedure is complete. So fee to trust is actually nonlinear, which is a sign of a complex process. So now the next thing I want to talk about is managing complexity in the fee to trust process. And so you might want to be wondering, what actually makes a process complex? And there are generally 5 elements that make a process complex. The first one is what I just discussed and what I just showed you, nonlinear. And so fee to trust is not linear. And so that's a sign that it's complex. Another element that makes a case complex or a process complex is that it's difficult to control. That basically means that you do not control every single step of the process. And, as you will see, and as I've shown you a little bit, a lot of the steps of the process are completed by other federal agencies or other branches within the Bureau. And so that makes it a little hard to control because you don't control everything. Another really fascinating element of the fee to trust process is what it's called an open system. And so what is an open system? Open system means that people outside of the process can insert themselves into the process. So, a state, a county, a citizen, they can appeal, they can submit objections or comments. They can request a copy of the application. There's definitely an open process where other people can insert themselves.
Like the Eastern Band of Charities is doing the Region 4 or North Carolina.
Was that a question or was just someone talking on the mic?
No, just a hot mic.
Oh, okay. Okay, and then the fourth thing I want to talk about is what makes a process complex is the system is adaptive. And what that means is the system, the process is constantly changing. There's some systems where you get a good SOP and you can use that SOP for years and years and years. Fee to trust is not like that. Fee to trust is changing. There are changes every year, multiple changes every year, and there are actually multiple changes planned in the future. So one of the things about fee to trust is just always, it's never stagnant. And then another thing that's hard about complex processes is they can be really hard to learn. In there, you just there isn't a class you can take in college that'll show you how to do some of these things. So you really have to kind of learn it on the job. So let's go ahead and go through. I just want to talk about some of these elements just a little bit. As I said before, fee to trust is nonlinear, and that basically means some steps of the process can be processed concurrently or repeated if needed. One of the things that you probably realize if you do work with fee to trust is that output is not always proportional to input. And so what that basically means is that, there are some cases that we have that you could put twice as much work into and get half as far. Not every case is created equal. Some cases can take years, many years to complete, and some cases can take 6 months to complete. That's one of the unique features of fee to trust. It's really hard, and you really don't know until you start getting into the case how long it's going to take. Another thing that's interesting about fee to trust is that small little changes to the process can have a huge impact on output. And I am going to talk about some scenarios as I go down and where I believe that has happened. And then on the other hand, you can make big changes to the process and then not really change anything, not a whole lot really changed. So that's one of the things about fee to trust. Another thing about fee to trust that can be hard for people is that it is difficult to control. Many steps of the fee to trust process are actually processed by other agencies or departments. For example, BLM and the GIS strike team, they do our land description reviews. DECRIM, which is our environmental department, they do our phase 1 and NEPA compliances. The solicitor, they issue preliminary title opinions, interim title opinions, final title opinions, under federal jurisdiction opinions, mandatory determinations, all kinds of stuff. Again, we don't control that. I mean, we don't control what goes in those letters or memos and then our opinions. The tribe also, we can't control when a tribe submits an application, how many applications they want to submit, what they put into the application. So we don't even control the input. And then also, if we get an appeal, that'll go to the Interior Board of Indian Appeals, and we don't have any control over the outcome of that decision. So there really is, it's really tough if you're used to controlling things and you like to exert a lot of control. Fee to trust will be hard for you because there's a lot of things that are outside of your control. And so, again, you can't control if the appeal is filed. So even an outside party can file an appeal. You can't control that. Fee to trust is also controlled by national policies and directives. So if there's something with the process you think you can improve, at the local level, you'll most likely not be able to improve it because if it's a part of a national policy, you will have to follow the national policy. So, sometimes making, improvements at the local level is a little hard because it's governed by national policies and directives. And then, of course, if there are any problems that are in some of those areas above that I just talked about, they're really out of your control. So you're going to have to work with the solicitor, with DECRIM, with the strike team, with the tribe to resolve those problems. So that actually makes it kind of hard. Fee to trust is also an open process. And so with the fee to trust process, outside parties can unilaterally insert themselves into the fee to trust process. So states, counties, towns, private citizens, we've even seen citizens groups, members of Congress even, and then with some of our off-reservation gaming, other tribes have inserted themselves into some of our cases. And we can't control that. And it's something that is a part of the fee to trust process. So that can be really hard for people to work with when you can't even insert who inserts themselves. The other thing is that some interesting about fee to trust is that some roles and responsibilities can actually be completed by different parties. So like our certificate of inspection and possession, that can be done by a realty specialist. It could be done by a land surveyor. It could be done by environmental protection specialists. It could be done in some instances, by a tribe. So the roles are not in a normal system. The roles are very clearly defined. Everyone has their little silo and they do their part. But sometimes in fee to trust, the roles can be different. People can do different things. Fee to trust is also an adaptive process. So in a non-adaptive process, change does not happen very often. Once you get an efficient process, there's no need to change it. And usually the only reason why things change in those systems is maybe some external force happened, and now they need to create a better product to stay competitive, and so they need to introduce change, but usually it's outside forces. But fee to trust is not like that. Fee to trust is truly an adaptive system. An external forces do not need to be present to introduce change. And changes and adaptations usually come from within the system. And that's what you're really seeing. There's been a lot of changes to the fee to trust process lately, and all of those are coming from within. So there isn't a lot coming from outside. And that's a sign of an adaptive process, just a sign of complexity. And then another thing that can be hard is that changes are made regularly. So it's almost like a living system. The system learns, the system adapts. So you'll see changes to the system of record, changes to the handbook, changes to the process. And so it can be hard for people. People, if you like to have an SOP and you don't want the SOP to change, fee to trust is going to be hard for you to work with because it's always changing and you really do need to keep up. Another thing is that fee to trust can be difficult to learn. So in a normal system, process can be broken down into parts and understood. They have a method of management of solving problems by just identifying the root cause, finding the bottleneck. That's something that in a normal system works. But with fee to trust, it's a little bit different. You can really only truly learn it by interacting with it, interacting with the system, not just the parts. And then a lot of our problem solving comes from experience. And what I mean is, I've been working fee to trust a long time, and we do always have issues with our cases. But it's just becoming rare now when I see an issue that I haven't seen already. And so a lot of times when an issue comes up, you can remember a case from 5, 6 years ago and say, oh yeah, we had that same exact problem, and then go back to that case and see how you solved it and what you did. You might have a template that you used and use that to solve your current case. So definitely fee to trust, a lot of the problem solving comes from experience. And so now I do want to talk a little bit about the fee to trust strike team. As I said earlier, I was on the strike team for 240 days. And I just want to talk about 3 or 4, or maybe 4 or 5 things that we did while I was on the team. And then I just want to talk about the impact of some of the things that we did. The first thing here is that in October of 2021, a memo was issued by the director of the Bureau requiring regions to provide central office a notification of 3 things. One was high-profile cases, and those were defined very broadly as a significant, controversial, or impactful cases. They also wanted to know when we received an under federal jurisdiction opinion. And if you don't know what that is, I do have one slide coming up after this. I'll just explain what that is. And then we also are required to provide receipt of an appeal. If we receive an appeal, we need to provide receipt of an appeal of a regional director decision also to central office. And I do want to talk about item 3 here because, when you look at this memo, it just looks like a notification requirement, and you just think, oh, we just have to send it in, and nothing's going to come of it, right? But an interesting thing happened with item 3 here. So once this policy went into effect, of course, nationwide, we're receiving appeals. Those appeals are getting sent to central office and notifications being sent. And an interesting thing happened. The assistant secretary has been assuming jurisdiction over those appeals. So in our current process, if we get an appeal, it goes to the Interior Board of Indian Appeals. But right now, it's actually taking 4 to 5 years to get a fee to trust appeal decision issued. So if you get an appeal, that case is you're automatically adding several years to the case. But now with this notification requirement, the assistant secretary has been assuming jurisdiction of those fee to trust appeals. And then from what I understand, once you go through the administrative record process, the pleading process, that it's only taking a matter of months to get those fee to trust appeal decisions decided. So again, this is just one little policy, one little notification requirement, but I believe will have a huge impact in our region because we do get a lot of fee to trust appeals in our region. And if the assistant secretary can assume jurisdiction of those appeals, it will speed up, it'll shave years off of our fee to trust cases. So, and again, if you just think about it in terms of complexity, I said before that in a complex system, a small change can make a huge difference. And I do believe that this is an example of that. I do believe this little notification requirement could have a huge impact in the future. And then one thing I did, let me just go back a little bit. I did talk about number 2, receipt of an under federal jurisdiction opinion. And some of you may be wondering what that is. And basically, in 2014, policy came out that was issued by the Department of Interior that required a 2-part inquiry to determine if a tribe was under federal jurisdiction in 1934 for purposes of the Indian Reorganization Act. So that policy, we had to do basically, BIA had to do an analysis every time we received an application from a tribe for each tribe. And that was fine for a while. And then in 2020, the policy changed, was rescinded. And then it basically made all the previous UFJ opinions obsolete. created a new test, but this time there was a little change that actually turned out to be big, but the UFJ analysis had to be completed by the solicitors and BIA could not do it. So we had to go back with every tribe and get a brand new analysis using a new test for each of our tribes, and we could not issue fee to trust decisions until that could be done. And so we were actually working with the solicitors, and we were actually doing pretty good on it. And we were starting to get a lot of some decisions, some UFJ opinions. And then the policy changed again in 2001, and they ended up rescinding the 2020 policy and reinstated that 2014 policy. But they did say that the UFJ analysis must be completed by the solicitors and not the BIA. So we couldn't actually use our old BIA analysis. And so we basically had to get a new UFJ opinion for all of our tribes. And so, and our solicitors, from what I understand, I believe they said that they actually have completed all of those UFJ analysis for all of our tribes in our region. And so that's good. And then of course, they also said that, this makes our cases stronger, more defensible if you get an appeal. So that's another good thing. But the only thing I worry about is that, so we basically could not issue any decisions for 2 years. So even though the policy was good, there was a negative impact because we couldn't do anything until we got those UFJ opinions. So I use an example. It's just every time, if we're in the Bureau and we're making policies with fee to trust, it's complex. We really need to look at the impact because the impact may be big or small. It may be hard to determine what that impact is going to be. Okay, so now what I want to do a little bit is just talk about another thing that the fee to trust strike team did, and that was national fee to trust training. I can only really remember national fee to trust training happening one time, I believe in 2017. There was a national realty conference and there was fee to trust training then. And that's the only time I can remember actually being national training. But one of the things is when we were on the fee to trust strike team, we did recognize that just to keep up with all the changes to the process, it would be beneficial to do a training. And so it actually kind of started small. We actually started by creating an annual fee to trust training requirement for realty staff, and that's just to keep up with the changes. And then I don't know if you guys know this, but in Alaska, they were not allowed to do fee to trust, but then the regs changed, I believe in 2017, and then they were allowed to do fee to trust. But then there were some other policies that didn't allow them to do fee to trust. And then finally in 2021, they were allowed to do fee to trust. Well, problem is that they never done fee to trust, so they really needed some training over there. And so we just did a region-specific fee to trust training for the Alaska region just to get them going, knowing that they've never done that before. And then there was this decision made that, to scale up the training and then go on ahead and turn it into a nationwide training. And so, in May, we did some nationwide training on fee to trust and reservation proclamations. So that was one really good thing that we did. And it was a pretty big undertaking getting all those training modules put together. Another thing that the fee to trust strike team did is we did quite a bit of work in the system of record. TAMS is our system of record. And so there was a lot of bit of work using that. One of the things is that, although I didn't work on it personally, is there was a lot of work on updating the BIA performance measures for fee to trust. Updating our IAPMS and agency priority goals. And so they were running a lot of queries, just trying to figure out how long it takes to do some of the steps and how long, it takes to get to one place to another. So there was a lot of work done there. And then one of the things we did on the strike team is we started reviewing all of the fee to trust cases out there. And there was some case processing as well. Some decisions were drafted, and some land acceptances trust acceptances were prepared. But one of the things we did see is that just looking into all those cases is that we did see a lot of missing data or incorrect data, and it was sometimes hard just looking at TAMS to try to figure out where the case was really at. And so we did determine that there was a need for a TAMS data cleanup project. And so, but before we could do that, we didn't have any business rules for how to encode national business rules. So we did create some national business rules for encoding of the cases, just so that all the regions would know what to put in the fields. And then, so we got that done, and then we started the data cleanup project, and that was a pretty big project. That took several months, and just to get our cases updated, because you're managing, your decisions are only as good as your data. So I think it was important that we get good data in TAMS. And then one of the things too is that, as I said before, there were some errors in TAMS, but the system it was actually a little bit hard to work with. If there was an error in TAMS, you had to basically do a help desk ticket to fix it, and it was kind of hard to fix. But one of the things that was done during the strike team was we created a fee to trust maintenance module. And then, so if there's an error with your case, you can actually go in and in most cases, just fix it using the maintenance module and you don't have to do a ticket. So that I think really saved a lot of time. I don't think that cleanup project would have worked as well if we didn't create that fee to trust maintenance module. And I think that's a module that we'll be using in the future and helping us out quite a bit, especially when we're doing QA. And then another thing is that we did notice that there were some that we did need to enhance TAMS with some change requests. And there were some reports that we were unable to run because there were no fields in TAMS. So we did do several change requests to improve the system. And I think we had actually several more that were in the works when I left. So we're definitely trying to improve TAMS, make it better. And then there was a weekly reporting that we always do for central office, and it's sent to the regions. So that was also basically beefed up and improved as well. Another thing we did, and it's probably one of the bigger changes, was this national policy memo. And so in April of 2022, there was a national policy memo, and the purpose was to improve the efficiency and quality processing fee to trust applications. But basically, what this memo did is it primarily focused on 2 steps out of the 16-step process, step 2 and step 5. Step 2 was the application review. And as I said before, the legal description review is a part of that. And then step 5 is the preliminary title opinion. So let's talk about step 2. If you were to actually pull up the handbook, go online and pull up the handbook actually requires a land description review from the BLM Indian Land Surveyor. But when we were analyzing it, we were looking at it. One of the problems, our surveyor did a great job getting our legal description reviews. But one of the problems was more structural. There was no time frame for BIA to submit the request for a land description review. And then once it was submitted to BLM, there was no time frame on how long it took to get completed. And so what we did with the national policy memo is we removed that land description review requirement from the handbook, and we actually changed it. And so what we did was we created 2 processing tracks. If the legal description on the application is simple, Realty staff, BIA Realty staff can now perform a Realty land description review. But if the legal description is complex, then that land description review will be done by our BIA GIS strike team. And so, this national policy memo basically created that 2-track process for simple and complex legals. And then it also created timeframes for the review, submission, and completion of those the land description reviews. And then we also required that Realty be trained before they complete training before they do the land description reviews. So that's a pretty big change. And if you think about it in terms of managing complexity, before the process was done by an outside federal agency, but now BIA is doing this process. So if you look at it from that viewpoint, we did make the fee to trust process less complex, because now it's done within BIA and we can actually, manage the process a little bit better. The other thing is that we did was we actually made a change to step 5. Step 5 is the preliminary title opinion. Now, if you were to pull the handbook and look at step 5 in the handbook, one of the required documents for requesting a preliminary title opinion is the land description review. But what we basically did with this NPM is we just removed that entirely from the PTO request. So before, you had to have that land description review before you could submit a preliminary title request. So what we basically ended up having in the original handbook was 2 waiting periods. So you would get an application, request the legal description review, and then you'd have to wait. And then until you actually got the review. And then if there was a problem with the legal description, you had to wait even longer, because then you had to work with the applicant to fix the legals, resubmit the legal description request. And then when you finally got a legal description review, then you could finally request a PTO. So we completely changed that, and now it's not sequential. You can actually request a legal description review the same time as you can request a PTO. You don't need to submit the legal description review with a PTO request. So I do think that will also save several months, could save up to a few months, because we're not doing those steps sequentially. We're now doing them concurrently. So I think this will save some time and it'll help us bring land into trust a little bit quicker. Another thing, although I didn't personally work on it, the Fee to Trust strike team did work on the Fee to Trust regulations. There were members of the strike team that were on the Fee to Trust regulations, and those regulations were released, I believe, in March, and then there were some virtual consultations in May. And there actually is a website that I have down there, and you can actually I just went on there earlier, and you can actually check out the draft regulations. You can actually check out. So these are our Fee to Trust regulations, and they're actually being updated. And you can actually there is a sheet that tells you everything that's changing. If you missed out on those virtual consultations, they have recordings where you could actually check out those virtual consultations online. And so, yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about that, just because it's all out there. But also the main reason why is because on Thursday for our Partners in Action conference at 2:00, there is going to be a presentation on the draft regulations. So I really want to just encourage everybody to, if you're able to attend a session tomorrow, to go on ahead and attend that session, and you can find out a lot more about the draft Fee to Trust regs. And then the final thing I just want to talk about is, with the strike team, is that we were working on the Fee to Trust handbook. We had gone through quite a bit of it, but just know I did take a look at those draft regulations, and they're a pretty significant revision. So I can promise you that the Fee to Trust handbook will also need to be updated when those regulations become final. So there will definitely be an update to the Fee to Trust handbook. You can expect that as well. So that's pretty big. The handbook and the regulations, that's a pretty big change that's going to be coming up. But I do encourage you to check out that presentation. And then I just have some final thoughts here, at the end about managing complexity in the Fee to Trust process. And I just want to try to be positive here. And the first thing, we talked about that Fee to Trust was nonlinear. But you can actually use that to your advantage. So if you work on steps concurrently, you can actually speed up the process. Now, one of the things on the strike team we did notice is that some agencies and some regions were still processing Fee to Trust sequentially, and they were not processing the cases concurrently. But in our region, we've been doing this for a long time, and but this is one way you can speed up the process, is just work on all the steps. You can even work ahead. If you're waiting on a document, just keep going ahead and get the next step ready. And when the document comes in and you already have it ready to go, so there's definitely things you can do to make this work in your favor. As we said before, Fee to Trust is difficult to control. We don't control all the steps. But one of the things is that you can still speed up the process by the way you interact and collaborate with the different agencies. So if you do have a problem with one of the steps that's outside of your control, you can work with the solicitors or with the surveyor or with the GIS person. Just work hand in hand with them to try to fix the problem, and also with the applicant. You're probably going to need updated documents. Get a good working relationship with your applicant so that you can get what you need quickly and get your stuff done. Fee to Trust is also an open process. So there are going to be times when, you're going to get requests for an application. And so, requests, or you're going to get an appeal, or you're going to get a congressional, someone from Congress is going to want to know the status of your application. And so just have a system in place, have a process so that when you get a FOIA, you already know, you have the templates together, you know what to do. Your records are already scanned so that you can get that out quickly. And then again, if you get an appeal, you already know how to do a table of contents. You've already organized your records in such a way that it's not hard to put together the administrative record. And then, of course, having a way to respond to congressionals. And also, I said that Fee to Trust is an adaptive system. Lots of changes have been happening. Lots of changes are coming up. And so please, you keep up with the changes. If there's any training about Feed to Trust, try to attend any training. We always have Partners in Action every year. If you're out there working for the tribe, be sure to sign up for every single Feed to Trust course every year. And I think you should be caught up if you do attend all of the Partners in Action sessions. But please keep up with the changes. That's one way to make it work. And then, of course, Feed to Trust is hard to learn, but the more you work with it, the better you'll get. So just stick with it, keep working hard, and you will get. I promise you, you will get better with Feed to Trust, especially if you're new out there. It may seem really hard to learn, but you can definitely learn. Anyone can learn Feed to Trust. And so, yeah, that's basically it for my presentation. Were there any questions, or were there any questions or comments out there? Okay.
Nothing in the chat, Russell.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening, and yeah, try to attend that Feed to Trust on Thursday. I think it's going to be really good. But thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Russell.
Thank you, Russell. Great presentation.